Our scripture lesson this morning comes to us from the Gospel according to Mark, the 4th chapter, verses 35 through 41. Listen for God's word as it comes to us today. Late that day, Jesus said to them, "Let's go across to the other side." They took him in the boat as he was. Other boats came along. A huge storm came up. Waves poured into the boat, threatening to sink it. And Jesus was in the stern, head on a pillow, sleeping. They roused him, saying, "Teacher, is it nothing to you that we are going down?" Awake now, he told the wind to pipe down and said to the sea, "Quiet, settle down." The wind ran out of breath. The sea became smooth as glass. Jesus reprimanded the disciples, "Why are you such cowards? Don't you have any faith at all?" They were in absolute awe, staggered. "Who is this anyway?" they asked. "Wind and sea at his beck and call." And here the passage ends, and may God bless these words as we seek to apply them to our lives. To begin today, I want you to think about me being able to use the remote. There we go. I want you to think about the storms in your life. I want you to think about, where is there a storm that is raging in your life? Maybe the storm is with a family member. Maybe you have an aging parent, or you have an adult child. Maybe you have a small child. And there's something there that is brewing that is just truly shaking your life like a thunderstorm. Maybe the storm in your life is at your job. Maybe you have a boss, you have a coworker, you have some kind of challenge that's been given to you. And it's just like shaking your house like a tornado. Where's that storm? Maybe your storm is an illness. I've heard so many stories just today about people wrestling with cancer and loved ones who are dying of cancer. Maybe you have an illness, a stroke, a disability of some kind, and it has swooped in upon you like a tsunami and is wiping you out. What's that storm? Or maybe you're causing a storm. Perfect timing. Perfect timing, Mike Hiskey. You weren't even at the board and you made that happen. You're the one that's raising the ruckus. Why? Why the ruckus? And the question becomes, peace. Where do we find calm in the midst of the storm? Where do we find a sense of wholeness in the midst of the storm? What is it that's going to calm the waves? And where are you going to find the courage to continue on? See, for me, that's why a passage like this passage from Mark's Gospel is so significant. And that's ultimately why I believe that this sermon series that we're doing on Jesus is greater than Christianity is so significant, because I believe what this sermon series will do, if you hang in there with us, if you open yourself to new ideas, you will be changed. I guarantee you, by the end of this, you will be transformed. Because you cannot hear this kind of message without really thinking about who you are, who God is, and how God is moving and active in your life. If you were here last Sunday, you heard our Pastor Justin Spurlock preach what I call probably one of the top 10 greatest sermons I've ever heard. Justin's sermon kind of goes up in that category. It was marvelous. And one of the things that Justin talked about is that there are 3 Jesuses that are operative right now in our lives. The first Jesus is the Jesus of history, the guy who actually walked 2,000 years ago, lived in Galilee, surrounding Galilee. He lived there and he taught. The second Jesus is we call the Christ of faith, Christ the King. And this was after the life, the death, and then the resurrection of Jesus. The disciples who were looking back at the historical Jesus, trying to figure out who he was, they were the ones who said, he is the Christ, he is the Messiah, he is the King. And especially as we went further and further into the first century, and then definitely switched over into the second century, where there was this drive for orthodoxy and an official statement of who and what Jesus is, they developed this notion of Christ the King, what was very, very different than the historical Jesus. And then, what Justin talked about is that there is a third Jesus. And the third Jesus is the Jesus that you decide is significant. How Jesus is important and critical for your life. Because here's the amazing thing when we look at these different Jesus, is so often the Jesus of history is forgotten about because the official Jesus is the second Jesus, the Christ of faith. And the Christ of faith is adorned with so many different creedal statements. And that to be a Christian, it's often presented to you that you have to agree with every single creedal statement. You have to express a belief in Jesus as everybody else expresses belief in Jesus. And if you don't, that somehow you're not part of the club. You're not going to heaven. You're not really a Christian. In fact, a lot of times when people hear the things that I teach, they say, you're really not a Christian, are you? And I say, well, I'm either the worst type of Christian or I'm the best type of Christian. I'm the worst type of Christian because I don't teach orthodoxy. Or I'll teach you about orthodoxy, but I won't ask you to affirm orthodoxy unless that's important for you in the midst of your life. Then I'm the best kind of Christian because I believe that God gave us a brain to use. And God gave us academic skills and abilities to understand. And I'm going to teach you how to step outside of the box. I mean, was Jesus the best type of Jew or the worst type of Jew? Well, a lot of people said he was the worst type of Jew. Jesus never believed he was a Christian that hadn't been invented yet. He thought he was a good Jew. And in some ways up here I could do a picture of the historical Moses and Abraham, and then the Moses and Abraham of the Jewish faith and religion. And then what Jesus said is no, transcend the religion of Judaism and go instead to God. So I will say that Jesus was the best type of Jew. And hopefully what we're trying to do here today is to help you become the best type of Christians, the best type of followers of Jesus. Not people who put blinders on their face, on their eyes, but believe and think for themselves. That's why I keep on coming back to the two most important words in the New Testament are the words according to. The gospel according to Mark, according to Luke, according to John, and according to Thomas, according to Sophia, according to Mary, according to Judas. All these gospels, people down through the ages who have said who Jesus is according to them. What we want to do is that by the end of the sermon series, unleash you, give you the permission to say, who is Jesus according to you? Now, if this is your first sermon in a while, then you are really late to the party. And you have got to go online and you've got to listen to all these sermons are online on YouTube. In fact, you know what's really exciting? Just this past week, we got the internet capability. Within a few weeks, we are going to be streaming live all of our sermons. That doesn't give you an excuse not to come to church. But what it does is it allows members of Columbine around the world to come to church on Sunday morning. But this is a slide that Matt Spruill put together for us. He has a series of slides that kind of presents to you the history of what we've covered. Now, Mitch says I'm always dangerous when I use this thing. I'm trying to get better. Okay, so we've covered so far, there's Jesus born, his ministry, his crucifixion and resurrection, the great, grand, glorious something that happened. And there we have Saul was converted in about 35 and 40. And then we have Paul's ministry beginning in 45 to about 67. And he establishes churches. And then look at right here, we have that makes me dizzy. All right, we have all of Paul's known letters. 1 Thessalonians, Galatians, Corinthians, Romans, Philemon, and Philippians. Notice that all of those letters come before, look down the bottom on the blue, we have Mark's gospel, Matthew's gospel, Luke, and John. And then on that red line up above it, we have this thing that is called the Q source. And this is why, if you didn't hear Justin's sermon, you've got to go back and hear it. The key thing to understand about the Q source is that the Q source is what we call this body of material. Poems, sayings, songs, myths, legends about the life of Jesus that were collected together. Some scholars believe they were written down. Some believe they were oral tradition. Others believe it's a combination of the two. But it was a body of material that developed after the life of Jesus during the time of the Apostle Paul, and that then it came to fruition when the gospel writers started writing. And it's important to understand that while we just have those four gospels, there are scholars who believe that there were probably anywhere from 100 to 200 different gospels that were written at the time that are lost to history. And that we really have only preserved these four gospels from the time. from this time. But when they were writing them, they picked and chose from the Q source stories from Jesus that were significant for them. And that's what I'm going to be getting into today in Mark's gospel. We're going to start with Mark's gospel. In fact, let me just show you where our path that we're going to do. I'm going to spend 2 Sundays on Mark's gospel, then 2 on Matthew, Luke, John. That takes us basically up to Advent. And then, can you believe we're almost close to Advent? And then in Advent, what Justin and I are going to be doing is showing how the birth stories that are present in Matthew and Luke are a product of the historical context of the time and what those birth narratives about Jesus are really all about. And then in January, we're going to come back and we're going to circle back and we're going to cover Paul's letters, Thessalonians, Galatians, Corinthians, Romans, Philemon, Philippians. Then we're going to look at the letters that are attributed to Paul that Paul didn't write. Oh, shocking for a lot of people. Ephesians, Colossians, 2 Thessalonians, some of those letters. And then probably sometime around May, we're going to look at the book of Revelation. So if you come every single Sunday and faithfully turn in your pledge, by May, you will be a biblical scholar. I mean, it's an exciting thing to pay attention to. Okay, so let's dive into Mark's gospel. Now, one of the things that you need to understand about Mark's gospel is oppression. You've heard me say this for the past several weeks about the Roman Empire and the boot of the Roman Empire. So much so that it kind of becomes numb to you, like as a history book about the Roman Empire. So what I did is I just thought to myself, okay, what are classical examples of the boot of an army on your neck? Because we as suburban Christians don't really know this unless you have, grandparents who fought in World War I and their parents in World War, or they fought in World War II and grandparents in World War I. So like up on the left, the Soweto uprisings in South Africa, where thousands, children killed, shot, where if you spoke out, you were arrested and beaten and executed and disappeared. Up on the right are Ukrainian Jews who, because they were Jewish, this is a line where they had to register. And then from registration, they went back home, and then they were taken from their homes and put in ghettos, to boxcars, to execution camps. The middle picture is a mother and child from Poland in Warsaw. If you know your history, the Third Reich came outside, they marched into Poland, and when the citizens of Warsaw heard that they were going to take their city, they put up a resistance, and they put up actually a fairly good resistance in the beginning, and they actually pushed back Hitler's armies. This enraged Hitler. So much so that there was a second great push and the city of Warsaw fell. And they leveled the city of Warsaw. And if you go to the Warsaw Museum in Warsaw, they have one of the most overwhelming dramatic presentations of what happened. They literally bombed the city to rubble. And it was really so moving that, that the college students, they heard this was going to happen. The college students, the architectural students, they went and they made hand drawings of every single building before it was destroyed. And they took those drawings and they hid them, and they rebuilt the city based upon the drawings of college students. But it was that type of oppression. A military boot on the neck of citizens. We read these histories and we forget that these were human beings. They had furniture that had been handed down to them by their loved ones. They had heirloom jewelry from the grandmother. They had little children who they sent to school, and they made lunches, and they had grandparents, and they had a backyard, and they had a front yard, and they had dogs, they had pets, and they had a neighborhood bakery, and they had their own kind of Starbucks. that everybody knew their name when they walked in. And there was a sense of community. And it was into this community that came a military presence that crushed. And this is what happened in Palestine during the first century. The Roman Empire had become so frustrated and angry with the zealotry within Jerusalem and in Palestine, who did have moderate success. These zealots had moderate success pushing back the Roman Empire. The goal was to remove them completely from the land. Well, Emperor Nero, when he heard about this, was exasperated and sent, it's different records, 47,000 troops. The biblical scholar Elaine Pagels talks about the fact that there was 47 to 67,000 troops. We don't know exactly, but a significant amount. Because here's the analogy. Right now, I think it's around 86,000 troops we have in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the size of Texas. Let's go with the smaller number, 47,000 troops in Palestine, which is roughly the size of Cheyenne to Littleton, Fort Collins to Lyman. So you have 47,000 troops. And it was a pogrom. They came down, Jewish, Christian, it didn't matter. They were marching from north to south, and they were burning and destroying and executing everything and anything in its path. Towns were burnt to nothing. They were setting up crosses and crucifying people on the road until they got to the city of Jerusalem, and they tore the walls down and executed everybody in the city. Again, Elaine Pagels, the New Testament scholar, says that Mark's gospel is wartime literature. Because you cannot be a good and faithful Jew without wondering, where is God in the middle of this? How could God allow this to happen to us? We've been good and faithful people, and throughout the Hebrew Scriptures it says that if we are faithful to God, that God will protect us. Well, then how come God is allowing this to happen? Be a member of Mark's congregation. You have given your life to follow Jesus. You have been told to follow Jesus, and that Jesus is going to come again to save us. And you've been told now for 20, 30 years, he's going to come again to save us, and yet he has not come. Why? Has God forgotten us? Have we angered God? Has God abandoned us? And it is to these Christians that Mark, which was probably not his name, that's what tradition described it to him, some author, a leader of this community, said, I must answer these questions. I must give these people integrity, hope, and courage. And so when he wrote his gospel, which was a new genre of literature, he went to the Q source. Are you tracking with me? Remember that thing called the Q source? And he picked and chose stories from the Q source about the life of Jesus and wrote a novella that his people could pick up and read and understand. You know, oftentimes when we read the Gospels, we think that somebody was following Jesus around with a steno pad, or that there was a videotape, and that these were transcripts of a videotape. And we think that each one of the Gospels tell that same story. No, they tell very, very different stories. I'm going to talk about that more next week. Well, in this sense that the Gospel of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, but the Gospel of Mark are it's like a historical fiction. And that's not to demean it. It means to make it even more significant. Because then the stories of the life of Jesus rang true for the people. They read the stories and they said, yes. And every single story in Mark's gospel, Mark intentionally said this one, this one, this one, and this one. And so that when you know this context, when you understand the gospel, put it together, it's like, wow. In fact, for the sermon, I had a very difficult time trying to pick just what is the right passage, right story to make the point. And that's why I landed on this one of Jesus calming the storm. Now, we've heard this story for 1,000 years. And you know, everybody kind of usually asks the question, did Jesus really calm a storm? And anybody who asks that question misses the point. The point is completely different. I'm going to reread the story. And knowing the context, hear the story a little bit differently. Late that day, he said to them, "Let's go across to the other side." They took him in the boat as he was. Other boats came along. A huge storm came up. Waves poured into the boat, threatening to sink it. And Jesus was in the stern, head on a pillow, sleeping. They roused him, saying, "Teacher, is it nothing to you that we are going to die?" Actually, it says down, but I'll say that in a moment. Awake now, he told the wind to pipe down and said to the sea, "Quiet, settle down." The wind ran out of breath. The sea became smooth as glass. Jesus reprimanded the disciples, "Why are you such cowards? Don't you have any faith at all?" They were in absolute awe, staggered. "Who is this anyway?" they asked. Wind and sea at his beck and call. Now, given the context, here's a painting by Tissot of this story. What would you say that those first century people, how did they interpret that? See, this is how, if I was a first century Christian, this is how I would interpret it. The Roman Empire is the wind and the sea and the storm. And those disciples, Mark's congregation. The boat is their little meeting place. And the wind beating upon the boat, threatening to sink them, is the turmoil that they were going in. And Jesus, asleep in the boat, speaks of a general truth that we have all felt. Haven't you ever, in the midst of your suffering, when you lost your home because of bankruptcy in the economy, when you lost your job, when your loved one came down with cancer, did you not ever look to the heavens and go, "Are you awake? Are you sleeping? Do you not see what's going on?" And then when Mark has his disciples look into Jesus and they wake him up, the Greek is this: "Do you not care that I am dying? That we are dying?" It has that kind of emphasis to it. Again, haven't you ever wanted to scream at God, "Do you not care that I am dying? Do you not care that my child is dying?" That sentence speaks to anybody who has suffered down through the ages. And then Jesus awakens. Doesn't look at the disciples. He gets up and he says to the storm, "Be still. Calm down." And that's the image that we have of it. He stands on the boat. "Be still. Calm down." The Greek is completely different. The Greek is this: "Be muzzled." It has that intensity, that emphasis of a something muzzling something violent. As if you were a reader, you would know that he is now attacking something violent. It is not "be still, be calm," "be muzzled." As if he was saying to a violent Roman Empire, "Be muzzled." And somehow, if you were Mark's congregation, you would find hope that somehow this Jesus would muzzle the Roman Empire. And then look what then Mark has Jesus say to his disciples. You cowards, do you not have any faith? That'd be Mark's congregation. On the one hand, you see a Jesus who is muzzling that which is violent. And on the other, you see a Jesus who is telling you, be courageous. Have faith in God. Have hope. Now, I can't imagine being in Mark's congregation or being in Soweto or a Ukrainian Jew or name a time and era of history. I can't imagine being someone sitting beside a loved one. I've been there, who is dying. And hearing words like this of being courageous, of having faith. Because we know what happened. The Romans did come down. The Romans did burn them. The Romans did execute them. And yet, the gospel story says, be courageous. Have faith. See, that for me is why this gospel was like hung on to and preserved. Because its message is so timeless. Because then I think about our own storms. And when we are battered by our own lives. You know, I think about this story and I come up with several things. I come up with, that in the midst of our own storms, we have to have faith in God. We have to have a faith in God, that God is working in the midst of your storm. God has not abandoned you in the midst of your storm. God is working right now in the middle of your storm. I call it the consequential will of God, contextual will of God. There it is. God is working in the middle of your context. God is raising up people, giving you new ideas, new thoughts, new concepts. God is working with you. Taoists would call this the work of the Tao, the presence of the Tao, the pushing of the Tao. Hindus would refer to this as Brahman, God working through Ganesh. And Ganesh is the elephant god that is leaning into all the burdens, all the obstacles in the middle of your way, and is working and bashing its way through those things. As Christians, we call it a ruach, which is Hebrew for wind, which is pushing, pushing, pushing. In the middle of your storms, you have to know that God is pushing. God has not settled for your present circumstances. God is working with you, and you must have faith in God. And you have to have faith in yourself. You have to have faith in yourself. I love this picture. No matter what the obstacles are in front of you, no matter how big the giant is in front of you, you already have what it takes to be successful. You already have the gifts and skills that it takes to survive and to thrive and to overcome. Again, Taoists would call this day. What they believe is that the Tao gives you the gifts that you already need. Hindus call this the blessings of Lakshmi, the goddess Lakshmi, who blesses and bestows all types of gifts that you need to be successful. Buddhists would call this right work, that you have the gifts to do the right work that you need to be successful in life. Christians, we call it spiritual gifts. That by the fact that you were created by our God, that you have been given gifts. And the Holy Spirit, the Ruach, is moving through you. You must have faith in yourself to be successful, to thrive. Now, we also must put on the Roman hat. This is a hard one. Put on the Roman hat. If you are the one who is causing the storm, be muzzled. You know, there's some people who just need to create chaos everywhere they go. They create it in their workplace. They create it in their home. They create it in their neighbor. Everyone's got a neighbor who's like, could we like buy your house and move you out of here? We live on the same block. I didn't know that. People at work, be muzzled. Like I want to say, if you're a politician right now and running for public office, be muzzled. You know, yeah, can I hear an amen? Can I hear an amen? Yeah. 2 weeks, 2 days, it's got to be over. You know, if you're one of these people, I want you to think about, why do you have to create the storm? Get into therapy. Bite your lip. We'll pay for the stitches. Sit down, lay down, roll over, play dead. Be still. Be still. You know, every hurricane has an eye that is still. I believe when you have faith in God and faith in yourself and faith in your community, you can find stillness. But you must practice stillness. It's more than just coming to church on Sunday. If this is the only time that you practice stillness, my message to you is that's not enough. Meditate. Pray. Read something that is sacred to you. And I will let you define what is sacred. Something that reconnects you with the holy other, that tells you repeatedly, you are a child of God. Because in the middle of that stillness, you can create the center. That no matter what the storm is around you, you can be grounded. Now, there are 3 Jesuses. There is the Jesus who walked in Galilee, who taught. There is the Jesus of the Christian faith. And maybe you're beginning to see how that developed. And one of the things that kind of blew everybody out of the water several weeks ago, probably the most controversial thing I said, is that Jesus of history did not believe he was the Savior or the Christ or a Messiah or a king. He believed he was a guy who was teaching. Mark's community, when they heard this message of hope, were the ones who began to say, he is a Savior. His message saves us. It gives us hope. He is the Christ. And then you can see how that then, over the first century, then into the second century, that became more of a concrete orthodoxy. But the most important Jesus, that I think the one that God cares about, is, who do you say that he is? Who do you say that he is? In the middle of the storms of your life that are raging, who do you say that he is? Would you pray?
Let us pray.